You always look
Emily
so serious
stared
in
at her
that suit.
phone
Only when
screen
I
in
need
the
to be.
dim
Well,
light
you
of
don't
their
need to be
bedroom,
now.
and her hands trembled as she reread the message she had just sent to Jake. The words felt like daggers, even as she typed them, but years of pent-up frustration had finally erupted in that single moment of weakness, and now there was no taking it back. Downstairs, she could hear Jake moving around in his studio, and the familiar sound of paint tubes being squeezed and brushes clattering against glass jars filled the silence between them like an invisible wall. This had been their life for the past 6 months, and Emily working late into the night, preparing cases, while Jake lost himself in canvases that never seemed to satisfy him. Their relationship had started like a fairy tale 5 years ago when Emily was fresh out of law school and Jake was displaying his work at a small gallery in Brooklyn. She remembered how his eyes lit up when he talked about art and how his passion made her feel alive in ways her corporate law job never could. And back then, his intensity felt like magic instead of madness. But somewhere along the way, the magic had turned into chaos, and Jake's creative drive became an obsession that consumed him entirely. He would stay up for days working on a single piece and then crash into depressive episodes where he couldn't even look at his brushes. And Emily found herself walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of Jake she would come home to. Tonight had been the final straw after she had spent 14 hours at the firm preparing for a major trial. Exhausted, she came home to find Jake drunk on their couch, surrounded by empty wine bottles and ranting about how she never understood his vision and how her success made him feel like a failure. His words had cut deep, especially because she had turned down a partnership opportunity last year just to give him space to pursue his dreams. The accusation that she didn't support him felt like a slap across the face when she had sacrificed so much. Every gallery showing she had funded and every bill she had paid alone and every late night she had spent reassuring him of his talent suddenly felt meaningless in the face of his resentment. So she had done it, and she had sent the text asking for a divorce and calling him unstable, because that's exactly what he had become. The man she loved had disappeared into someone she barely recognized, and she couldn't keep pretending that love alone would fix what was broken between them. Jake's phone buzzed on the paint-splattered table, and he glanced at it absently while mixing burnt sienna with titanium white on his palette. When he read Emily's message, his brush clattered to the floor and paint splattered across his worn sneakers like drops of blood. He read the words again and again, trying to make sense of them. Unstable. And that single word echoed in his mind like an accusation he had heard before from his father and from gallery owners who had rejected his work, and now from the one person whose opinion mattered most. The wine he had consumed earlier suddenly felt like poison in his stomach, and he stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before he got sick. And as he sat on the cold tile floor, he realized that Emily's text wasn't just anger, but it was a mirror reflecting everything he had been too afraid to see in himself. He thought about their last real conversation 3 weeks ago, when Emily had asked him to come to her firm's annual gala. He had refused, claiming that corporate events suffocated his creativity and that her colleagues looked down on him for being an artist. And she had gone alone, with disappointment written all over her face. And he had spent that night drinking and painting a canvas he would later destroy. Jake pulled himself up and walked to their bedroom where he could see Emily's silhouette through the frosted glass, his heart pounding. He wanted to burst in and beg her to take it back and to tell her he would change. But the words felt hollow even in his own mind, because he had made those promises before and broken them just as easily. Instead, he went back downstairs and looked at his latest painting, and a chaotic explosion of reds and blacks that was supposed to represent passion, but now just looked like rage. His art professor had once told him that great artists channel their pain into beauty, but all Jake had managed to do was turn his pain into a weapon that hurt the people he loved most. He remembered the early days when Emily would sit in his studio for hours just watching him work. She never complained about the smell of turpentine or the fact that he forgot to eat when he was in the zone, and she would bring him coffee and kiss his paint-stained hands and tell him he was going to change the world. What had he done to deserve that kind of love? And more importantly, what had he done to destroy it? Emily couldn't sleep that night, and she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound that might indicate Jake had read her message. When she finally heard his footsteps on the stairs around 3 in the morning, she held her breath, but he didn't come to their room, and instead she heard the front door close quietly. She grabbed her phone and saw that he had left her a voicemail, but she couldn't bring herself to listen to it yet, because hearing his voice would make everything too real, and she needed to maintain the wall she had built around her heart. The next morning, Emily went through the motions of getting ready for work like a robot. She put on her power suit and applied her makeup with precision and practiced her courtroom face in the mirror, but her eyes betrayed her, and they were red and swollen from crying. At the firm, Marcus noticed immediately, and he asked if she was okay, and Emily gave him her standard response that she was just tired from working late, but Marcus had known her since law school, and he wasn't buying it. During a break between depositions, Marcus cornered her in the conference room and told her that whatever was happening, she didn't have to go through it alone. And Emily felt her carefully constructed facade crumble, and she told him everything about Jake's instability and her message and the years of trying to hold their relationship together while watching him fall apart. Marcus listened without judgment, and then he shared his own story of divorce and how sometimes loving someone means letting them go so they can find themselves. And his words both comforted and terrified her, because letting go of Jake felt like cutting out a part of her own soul. That evening, Emily finally listened to Jake's voicemail. His voice was raw and broken as he apologized for everything, and for not seeing her pain, and for taking her love for granted. But what struck her most was when he said he was checking himself into a treatment program for his drinking and his depression, because he realized he couldn't be the man she deserved until he figured out who he was supposed to be. Emily played the message 3 more times, and each time she heard something different. First his pain, then his regret, and finally his determination. And for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. But hope was dangerous, because it made her want to call him back and tell him she didn't really want a divorce and that they could work through this together. But she knew that would be a mistake, because Jake needed to do this for himself, not for her. She saved the voicemail and turned off her phone and poured herself a glass of wine. And as she sat alone in their apartment, surrounded by Jake's paintings and their shared memories, she wondered if love really could conquer all, or if some damage was simply too deep to heal.
3 weeks passed without any contact between Emily and Jake, and Emily threw herself into work with an intensity that worried even her most demanding partners at the firm, and she won her major trial, but felt no satisfaction in the victory because Jake wasn't there to celebrate with her like he used to be. She had moved some of his paintings into storage, but kept a few hanging in the apartment. And there was one in particular that he had painted during their first year together, and it showed a woman who looked like her standing at the edge of a cliff with her arms spread wide like she was about to fly, and he had titled it Freedom Through Trust. Emily stared at that painting every morning while drinking her coffee, and she wondered if Jake had somehow predicted their future even back then, because now they were both standing at their own cliffs, trying to decide whether to jump or step back to safety. Her phone rang one afternoon, and it was Jake's mother, Patricia. The older woman's voice was warm but concerned as she asked if Emily would meet her for coffee, and Emily agreed, even though part of her wanted to hide from anything connected to Jake. At the coffee shop, Patricia looked older than Emily remembered, and she explained that Jake had been attending therapy sessions and AA meetings religiously for the past 3 weeks, and that he was staying with her while he worked on himself. But Patricia wasn't calling to ask Emily to take him back. Instead, she wanted to apologize. Patricia explained that Jake's father had been an alcoholic too, and that she had enabled his behavior for years, thinking love would fix him. And she had watched Jake inherit not just his father's artistic talent, but also his demons, and she blamed herself for not getting Jake help sooner. Emily reached across the table and held Patricia's hand, and told her that Jake's choices were his own, and that no one could have forced him to change before he was ready. And Patricia smiled through her tears and said that Emily had always been too kind for her own good. Then Patricia pulled out a letter from her purse and explained that Jake had written it, but was too afraid to send it himself because he didn't want to pressure Emily or break the boundary she had set. And Patricia asked if Emily would read it when she was ready, but warned her that it might break her heart all over again. Emily took the letter home and let it sit on her kitchen counter for 2 days, afraid to finally open it at midnight on a Friday when she couldn't sleep. And Jake's handwriting was shaky but deliberate as he poured out everything he had learned about himself in therapy.
The letter began with an apology, but not the superficial kind Jake had given before. It offered genuine remorse, and this time he took full responsibility for his actions without making excuses or asking for sympathy. And he acknowledged that calling Emily unsupportive had been a projection of his own failures, and that she had been his rock when he should have been standing on his own 2 feet. Jake wrote about his childhood, how watching his father drink himself into oblivion had terrified him, and how he had promised himself he would never become that man, but then realized he had been following the same destructive path, and his therapist had helped him understand that his art had become an addiction too, and a way to escape reality instead of engaging with it. He described the moment he hit rock bottom, and it wasn't when Emily sent the divorce text, but 3 days later when he looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back at him. And he had called a crisis hotline at 4 in the morning, and the counselor had helped him find a treatment program that same day. What moved Emily most was when Jake wrote about what he had learned from losing her. He said that loving someone doesn't mean making them responsible for your happiness, and that he had placed an unfair burden on her by expecting her love to heal wounds only he could address. And he understood now that she had tried to save him, but that drowning people often pull their rescuers under with them. Jake's letter ended not with a plea for reconciliation, but with gratitude. He thanked her for loving him enough to walk away, and for showing him that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction. And whether they found their way back to each other or not, he wanted her to know that her message had saved his life, even though it had felt like it was ending it. Emily folded the letter carefully, tears falling freely, and placed it in the drawer where she kept their wedding photos and love letters from years past. And she realized that Jake was finally becoming the man she always knew he could be, but the question remained whether that growth had come too late for them. The next morning, Emily sat down and wrote her own letter, determined. And in it, she told Jake that she was proud of him for getting help, and that she had also started seeing a therapist to work through her own patterns of codependency and people-pleasing. She admitted that she had ignored warning signs early in their relationship because she wanted to be the woman who could love him enough to fix him, and she understood now that she couldn't fix anyone but herself. Emily proposed something unconventional, hopeful but cautious, and she suggested they spend the next 6 months apart, focusing on their individual healing, and then, if they both still wanted to, they could meet and see if the people they had become could build something healthier than what they had before. And she sealed the letter with words she had never been brave enough to say before. And loving you means wanting you to be whole, even if that wholeness doesn't include me. As she dropped the letter in the mailbox, breathing deeply, Emily felt lighter than she had in years, and she didn't know if she and Jake would find their way back to each other, but for the first time she understood that her happiness couldn't depend on that outcome, and she was learning to stand at her own cliff with arms spread wide, trusting that whether she flew or fell, she would survive. What we learn. This story teaches us that love alone cannot sustain a relationship when one or both partners are emotionally unhealthy. Jake's mistake was using Emily as a crutch instead of addressing his inner demons, while Emily's pattern was believing she could save him through sheer devotion. We learn that enabling destructive behavior isn't love.